Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to The Grid. I'm Joel, aka The Blood Grammar, and Marvel's Phase 4 has way more continuity and is a lot more harmonious than you probably thought, and has ties to previous phases and also obviously future phases coming up inside of the MCU. So we need to talk about all that, so go ahead and grab your popcorn. Sit on down and let's get right into it. The Marvel Cinematic Universe MCU for short was built very similar to the way that the current phase is going right now. You see, characters were introduced in similar ways, basically in singular stories and singular formats inside of phase 1. Currently the way they are right now. We get Miss Marvel, Moon Knight, Werewolf by Night, America Chavez, and a bunch of others. And basically what I'm saying here is, if you look back, characters were introduced inside of phase 1 in a singular format because they had to. Otherwise, having team up movies like the Avengers at the end of phase 1 would have made no sense at all, which is why we have appearances like this.
Stark.
General.
You always wear such nice suits.
Touche.
Pretty much the same thing that we're doing here. It's just now we have something to shoot for, and this is all started inside of Loki. If you really want to understand where all this starts, we need to go back to Loki. Everything starts with the adventures of Loki and Sylvie, whatever the heck they were trying to do with the TVA. All of it starts because of what Sylvie does to He Who Remains. And if you don't remember or don't know, you didn't care to watch that series, what she ends up doing, spoiler alert here, if you want to go watch it, pause here, okay? What she does is kill He Who Remains. That then branches the entire timeline from start to finish, and this is practically where we are currently right now. This is where everything kind of kicks off and where we get all the variants of different Doctor Stranges and all that kind of stuff inside of the Multiverse of Madness. All of it starts here. So from their actions, more Sylvie's than anything, of course, began the entire multiversal war. And inside of his entire speech, He Who Remains actually mentions multiversal wars between himself in different variants of the multiverse. This is literally why he tries to create this sacred timeline, is because he's trying to keep from annihilating the timeline, trying to fight himself at the same time, which is where we get Kang from and all that kind of stuff inside the quantum realm. But that's a different video. Moving into everything that's going on inside of the multiverse. Again, it all starts with Sylvie and what she does to He Who Remains. We then kick off into Wandavision from there. So again, looking back at what happened inside of the events inside of Loki, at the end of Loki specifically, we then get a call out inside of Wandavision to Wanda from her kids. Let's back up again. The above projects that I talked about earlier in the video were a part of the first year of phase 4. Everyone thought that the phase was going to be a throwaway phase because of COVID anyway, but it was okay. And in the first year, we got a culminating movie which had crossover central written all over it, which is basically No Way Home. The team up of Doctor Strange with Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was gold.
I love gold. The look of it, the taste of it, the smell of it, the texture.
I'll have some of the yellow.
That's what everybody was looking for in the rest of the phase. But
Is this what you want?
we didn't get that.
No. No!
We didn't get that at all. We got more of singular stories like Moon Knight, She-Hulk, Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, which is actually a standalone story for Wanda, but we won't get into that in this video. That's a different one. Miss Marvel, Werewolf by Night, and so many other characters, again, inside of phase 4. There's a lot of characters that we could go into and dive deeper into inside of this. But we need to take one more step back for just a second. And here's why. We can't hold phase 4 to the same standard that we held phase 3 because, again, that needed payoff, and we haven't gotten that yet. If we're specifically looking at Endgame, the crossovers that happened all throughout that movie specifically were built upon over years and years of work. So we cannot just throw away everything that we've been doing inside the MCU over the past 3 phases just because phase 4 feels like it's dragging and has a bunch of different character plumb lines, and She-Hulk is writing her own ending at the end of every episode that she wants to talk through the fourth wall in. We can't do that with this phase at all because we haven't gotten there to actually pay the rest of that off yet. And even inside of Quantumania, there's still that we have to get into, and there's way more backstory that we need to build with Kang to even step foot into phase 6 and all the different storylines that we're going to get into inside of that with Fantastic Four, X-Men, and all kinds of stuff there. What we can actually compare phase 4 to is phases 1 and 2. Probably more phase 1 than phase 2, but phase 1 vastly is disjointed at the center, because if we can look anywhere else for proof, there is nothing else that I need to point out to you than this. Tony Stark's appearance inside of Incredible Hulk makes no sense. The recasting of 2 characters, the crossovers that did not happen, Thanos' post-credit that was a complete afterthought that almost didn't even happen. Selvig being mind controlled at the end of Thor is pointless because Loki literally does the same thing to him inside of Avengers. And then Iron Man 2, a lot of that was just force-fed connective pieces for the Avengers movie that was coming up later on. So phase 1 was good, but could you honestly say those early projects could hold up to anything inside of phase 4? And if you're arguing, you really think Incredible Hulk could stand up to Loki?
What?
I don't think so. Now, phase 2 had a bit more of a plan to it and a little bit more of an intro to the Infinity Stones. The fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. paved the way for the Avengers. Tony's PTSD paved the way for Ultron. Still took 3 full phases for all of that to mature, but we understood where we were going inside of phase 2 because the payoff was clear. Everything was gearing up to a war between the Infinity Stones and the Avengers. Yes, give me more of that. Now, understandably, I get that some people just did not care for these 2 things, specifically Aunt May's death and She-Hulk twerking.
You know I'm the hottest, you ain't never.
I get it. I understand it. It wasn't that bad, but I understand it. Now, understanding the buildup and how things have to be built over time and inside these phases is enough to really end this video and go about your business. However, you come here for a little bit more than that. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the specifics of each of these stories and how they all fit under their own type of umbrella. So if we take a step back, we have 4 different types: multiverse, magic, street level, and cosmic, which not surprisingly to me is actually very similar to the lines of comics that we have inside of Marvel's full line of comics. So you got street level heroes like Daredevil and Spider-Man, mutants, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Namor, and then magic, so Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, Mephisto, and those types of characters. They're all inside of their own buckets, and they all play well as long as we build a certain theme around their stories, and then when we pull them all together, it all makes sense when we do it the right way. So when you get storylines like No Way Home being built off of One More Day, the comic series that pretty much brings a bunch of different characters like Iron Man and Spider-Man and Mephisto and Doctor Strange as well, all those characters inside of one comic series, there has to be a understanding of who they are first before we actually bring them together. And then when we bring them together and understand that there's a common thread of what they're fighting for or against, it makes more sense to do it. And that's the reason why phase 4 is taking a little bit more time to actually do some of those payoffs. So in each of these 4 buckets, you can see specific character traits for each of the characters or storylines that we see inside of them. Specifically for the street level heroes, we see that there are pretty much just regular people, specifically starting with Hawkeye. If we look at Hawkeye, we see that he's literally just some guy that is basically given weaponry to arm himself and become a hero, but he's really just a regular person. He loses his hearing. He doesn't really have much in terms of weaponry. All he really has is
Go-to weapon is 2 sticks, string.
and the entire story is about stopping street level crime. Black Widow about world domination, Falcon and the Winter Soldier about terrorism, She-Hulk about the repercussions of having superpowers, and Wakanda Forever sets a global conflict between Black Panther, Wakanda, and the Thunderbolts, which is upcoming. And according to Kevin Feige, Spider-Man is now also included inside of those street level heroes as well.
And as you start to see, you talk about Ghost Rider, we've got Blade, we've got Doctor Strange, we're at the supernatural angles, we've got the street level with our announcement of Daredevil, and of course Spidey going into the street level heroes.
And all of these street level heroes possibly will culminate into a Civil War type story, which basically will bring, at least from what I'm looking at, Wakanda and the vibranium type of situation, the Thunderbolts fighting over that, and all that stuff coming to a head, or more specifically inside of Captain America New World Order, which is basically where I think all of that stuff is going to come to a head. Switching gears to magic, and most of these projects have connections to the multiverse saga, but Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is basically the kickoff for everything, gearing us up for the Multiverse of Madness, and introduces incursions, which, if you don't know what an incursion is basically when two worlds collide and one of them or both of them are annihilated because of actions because of some other character inside the MCU. So when Doctor Strange actually dreamwalks, he causes a incursion, and the teaser at the end of that would go on to assume that we're going to go through the multiverse fixing incursions along the way. Werewolf by Night features Man-Thing, which is basically in the comics a Nexus being who basically lives in a swamp that is a jumping off point for Nexus realities inside the MCU. Moving on into WandaVision, Wanda's action inside of that show then carry over into Multiverse of Madness, then leading us to Doctor Strange, causing incursions inside of the MCU, which also then sets up Coven of Chaos because of the incursions that he creates. Joe Locke has now been cast as a possible for the teenage version of Wanda's son, Billy, and because of that, we are possibly being, or at least we have already been set up, at least at this point, for the Young Avengers, which, by the way, is young Loki, the grandson from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Kate Bishop, America Chavez, and Cassie. In the comics, the Young Avengers actually also connect heavily to Kang as well because of Iron Lad. Then we got Moon Knight, which is Mark Spector, or Steven, whoever we're talking about. Basically, we have Mark Spector, who has a bunch of different personalities, and inside of those personalities we also have Moon Knight, who is the avatar for ancient moon god Khonshu, which is basically how Moon Knight is given his powers in the first place. He's basically impenetrable, he's indestructible, and it all comes because Mark becomes a mercenary later on in life, and to escape, or pretty much escape death, he becomes the avatar for Khonshu, which then leads us into our cosmic stories, which again is introduced by WandaVision with the introduction of S.W.O.R.D., which, if you don't know, that's basically the cosmic version of S.H.I.E.L.D. that replaces S.H.I.E.L.D. Long story short. But we also get an introduction to Monica Rambeau gaining her powers from going through the Hex multiple different times. The Eternals, a cosmic story that connects the gods and creation of the universe to the MCU, or basically the creation of the Infinity Stones and deviants and all these kinds of things inside the MCU, and why we have this celestial baby stone sticking out of the earth at this point, but nobody's talking about it. Whatever. We then finish this all up with Thor: Love and Thunder, and again we're introduced to a potential young Avenger in Love, and introduced to Hercules as well, which could also be another Avenger. Shang-Chi and Ms. Marvel start at the street level, ending in cosmic level powers, but Ms. Marvel sets up the Marvels and possibly Secret Invasion. Shang-Chi's 10 rings become a beacon that is pointing, at least from what it looks like, to Kang's army. And that then ties us through the multiverse. Loki, What If, Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and this is why you don't want to force crossovers inside of the MCU when they weren't already earned.
Has to do with Spider-Man, I think. I'm still figuring this place out, but I think a bunch of guys like us should team up. Could do some good.
But
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Loki is possibly the most important story of the entirety of the Phase 4 because it is the direct link to the multiverse and Phase 3 at the same time. Connects the idea of travel or time travel to multiple realities in game, and main character or the main character's origin happens in the events of the in-game, which specifically happen at the end of or the middle part of Endgame, when Loki, or the variant of Loki that we see in Endgame, goes back in time and actually is encountered by the TVA. And furthermore, as you probably already knew where I was going with this part of the video, it sets up the big bad of the entire multiverse saga, Kang. What If shows us what happens when we mess with the fabric of timelines, of what basically happened with Sylvie killing He Who Remains. Spider-Man No Way Home introduces heroes from other franchises into these movies in the MCU, so it shows that we now are very willing to go into other franchises and bring them into this franchise. Looking at you, Fox, bring the X-Men home. Anyway, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness sets up incursions and again brings about the multiversal war and the wars between universes. All of that information was fine and dandy, but again, you come here for way more substance than that. So I'm going to give you a little bit more deep dive into the theme of Phase 4 and the theme that I believe is practically a theme across all of Phase 4 and even leading into the beginning of Phase 5, which is identity and grief. Wandavision creates literal identities based on the pain she's gone through from her actual identity.
Well, Mary,
Eventually changes gears completely once
Give me a break.
is now something completely different. Vision also does not know who he really is. The perception of Wanda's memory or something else meets a different version of himself whom also has no identity or no sense of identity, just does what he's told and only what he's told. The two then become one, so to speak, and then become the second version of Vision at the same time. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Sam struggling with the identity of taking over for Steve, and Bucky struggles with the identity or trying to figure out who he is after not being the Winter Soldier anymore after the events of Phase 3. And in both of these stories, both characters or all the characters inside these stories deal with some sort of grief. Wanda losing her children and Vision basically even dealing with the fact that she creates the hex in the first place because she is grieving over the loss of both her brother and Vision. And in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Sam is grieving the fact that he has to try and fill these shoes, or at least he doesn't even know if he can. And Bucky is basically, like I said, he's struggling with who he is, but he doesn't really know who he wants to be either, so he grieves over the fact that he doesn't have anything to do really after Phase 3. Loki struggling to find out who he is while meeting different identities of himself, literally inside of multiple different variants of the same person, ending with two versions of Loki meeting with a separate identity of the MCU's new big bad, Kang, He Who Remains, which is a literal different person from a part of another portion of the multiverse, and a different identity taken on by Kang completely. And again, we see the rearing of grief inside of Loki, which again happens when he sees himself going through his entire timeline, seeing his mother die, and also seeing himself being killed by Thanos. Black Widow. Government assassins trying to redefine their identity after taking down the head of Operation Dreykov, and then finding out along the way that the boss's daughter was inside of that operation, was actually also blown up and reconstructed based on an identity that needed to be freed as well. What If literally is about alternate identities of heroes, including zombies, around the entire multiverse. Shang-Chi creates an identity to get away from his old life, and then to blend in literally during the beginning creates a different name for himself, so Sean or Shung to Sean, and struggles to find out who he is between a son of Talo and the heir of a criminal organization, the Ten Rings. The Eternals, immortal beings with enormous powers that have gone by many identities throughout their long lives, but find out they're nothing more than copies of the same being, identities erased multiple different times, and basically just robot. Hawkeye, Clint trying to bury his Ronin identity and handing the Hawkeye identity to Kate Bishop. Spider-Man No Way Home. Tom Holland's Spider-Man comes face to face with the other Spider-Man identities from other realities. The movie then ends with Peter losing his public identity and begins with him losing his private identity in the beginning of the film, and completely reinvents his public identity at the end as a new Spider-Man, or a Spider-Man without tech. Moon Knight struggles with 4 different identities altogether. Multiverse of Madness. Doctor Strange comes face to face with what he could become if he decides to push too hard for the pursuit of whatever power is so important to him. Miss Marvel. Kamala Khan struggles with her identity of becoming or being a normal teenage Pakistani girl. She also loves Carol Danvers, and she tries to figure out how to balance the identity of her newfound powers while also trying to figure out how to understand her powers as a mutant. She-Hulk spends several episodes legally battling over the usage of the identity that is She-Hulk, which is basically a lawsuit that comes over her from an influencer, Titania, fighting over the name and use of She-Hulk inside of branding, basically. And then Jen also internally wars with the double identities that she has, being both herself as Jen and also as She-Hulk, which basically is, first she wants to be Jen, but then she wants to be She-Hulk when she figures out that there are some perks to coming with there are perks that come with She-Hulk, which basically come with this. Drunk.
Captain America! Fuck!
And this. And this. Werewolf by Night. The whole thing is about hiding your identity in front of others so you don't become found, but Jack Russell has to wrestle with who he is, the man or the monster. Black Panther Wakanda Forever. The heroes and leaders inside of Wakanda now have to struggle with the identity that now they have no leader and the outside world looks at them as less than, but they also have to wrestle with the identity that they are the most powerful nation because of vibranium and what that does to the perception around the world. And lastly, Guardians of the Galaxy, the holiday special. Now this one completely is a little bit left field, but it deals with Peter Quill taking over a planet and finding his identity as a leader, as the manager of nowhere. But he also, again, is a little bit inside of his own grief because he doesn't have Gamora anymore. And Mantis and Drax kidnap Kevin Bacon because of the multiple identities that he has played inside of his own movies, so they only see him as those identities and basically say, you are coming with us because our friend needs to have a little bit more Christmas cheer. But they have no idea that he's really just a human and only plays those characters on TV. Now, I didn't talk about these when I broke them down individually, but going back, Thor: Love and Thunder looks a little bit at the grief spectrum, looking specifically at Thor, where he is coming in the beginning of that movie, towards the end of that movie. In the beginning, he is drastically overweight. And because he has basically lost everything at the end of phase 3, we practically look through the lens of him coming out of that, and then he loses everything at the end when he loses Jane for the second time. She-Hulk basically does a similar thing, but in this instance it's a little bit more gradual, because what she ends up having to wrestle with or grieve with is the identity that she no longer has anymore, in terms of just being a lawyer and just being Jen. Werewolf by Night, can't say anything more than that. Man-Thing is literally being in prison because of an accident and because of him being a monster, and Werewolf by Night basically is trying to save him, but there's just a bunch of grief and gore everywhere. Black Panther, nothing more to be said. Grief all throughout that movie, but the main part of it is finding, or Shuri finding, her identity inside of that grief and what she does with it. Now, I have done my best to go as far and wide over the MCU's Phase 4 and find as many through lines as I possibly can inside of this video, but I probably missed a couple or more. So if you want to send me what I missed, go ahead and put that down in the comment section. I would appreciate it, because I probably missed a whole bunch of stuff. I'm sure of it. I'm only one person. I can't watch everything, although I try. But hit that like button if you liked all this information. If you want to know more about it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And until next time, until next video, blurred out.